So good afternoon, everybody. My name is JANA CALVO, and I am the head of research and participation in the Ministry of Universities here in Spain. Welcome everybody to this roundtable of governance and participation in the University of the Future. We are humble people, as you can see. As it has been said by the Minister of Universities here in Spain, Manuel Castells, we are currently working in the elaboration of a superior university law. And that is why we are interested today on the debate we will have right now about governance, which is one of the main topics within the law itself, and it's really important for us. I will be moderating the debate, but I would like to pass the word to Mr. Manuel Blanco in the first place. He is head of the Architecture School in Polytechnic University of Madrid, host of EDUMEET' 2021. Go ahead, Manuel, Mr. Blanco.
Thank you very much, Hannah. For me, it's a real pleasure and honor to be here today. Minister, welcome to my school, to the exam. We are the oldest school of architecture in Spain. We like to say that we date from the time of Juan de Herrera, the architect of the Escorial. And we have been teaching what architecture is. But at the same time, we are very interested in anything linked to education and to universities. We belong to one of the most important universities in our country. We are very proud of being Universidad Politécnica, and we are very, very proud of belonging to a school very open. I have been re-elected by my school in the last few weeks, and for a second mandate, and my lemma, my motto was an open school, una escuela abierta. And we like this school with a lot of strata that discuss, that debate, and this thing of EDUMEET' is one of the biggest and most important example of it. All the organizers, Enrique, Jesus, all of you, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to receive in the virtual space in the pandemic of our school, one of the most important figures of the intellectuality in our country, that by chance is now our Minister of Universidades, which we are very proud of it. So thank you to all of you. And we have to think what the future is. In that future, universities are a very important tool. We are a public university, a democracy university, and that's very important for us. And we have not only to teach, but to teach how we are going to build our future. And the generation of people who are now in my school, mostly women, are the ones who are going to do it. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here.
Thank you so much, Manuel. And also another Manuel Castells, Minister of University of the Government of Spain, would like to address us regarding this important topic, which is the governance, before we start the roundtable. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Blanco, dear colleague. And I also want to thank the organizers of this EDUMEET' encounter for inviting me to share very briefly. Unfortunately, I would like to actually follow my old law and stay here and discuss until midnight about all the issues that you are going to be exchanging. And I also want to thank my advisor, JANA CALVO, for helping to this connection. JANA is a key element in the development of our project to establish a new system of governance in the Spanish universities based on, first of all, participation and consultation. We have many ideas, but what really matters is that these ideas connect to what the university community and the Spanish society at large think should be the university and governance of the university, and therefore she's actually the critical link between what we do at the ministry and what is happening in the university and in society. Let me just, beyond formality, use these 5 minutes that I had been allocated to say a few things that with some substance, at least. governance really is, I would say, is the heart of the university problems and the university dynamics in our world. Is the most important part. And this is not a self-serving statement for your meeting. Every time that we try to legislate, to propose a reform, everybody says, well, but the most important thing is finance. Without finance, the rest is ideology. I'm not sure of that, because with lots of finance and a bad governance is a waste of resources. So the critical thing is the system of governance. And that's why your conference is so important. And this system of governance, in my opinion, has to be able to combine two poles of two axes. On the one hand, to ensure democracy and participation of the university community. On the other hand, the ability to make decisions and to implement policies and strategies in a constantly changing world. So we need executive capacity, but this executive capacity has to be combined with a full system of participation and democracy. So that this is not a company, this is a university community, and particularly in our case, that as most countries in Europe, the core of our system is the public university. It is essential that students, workers, researchers, professors, and the whole system of governance of the university participate actively in the decision-making process. And at the same time, we really need a council of government, rector, whatever system we find that is decisive enough, that has been democratically elected, and not simply designated by a higher authority, and at the same time able to have, to some extent, room to maneuver in this changing world. Imagine only a year and a little bit more, we had been in the pandemics. Imagine if universities would not have the leaders that we have had in Spain and in the rest of the world, able to face a completely unknown territory. How to shift, as we were able to do, with very few glitches in Spain, in 1 month, and for the 4 months that were still left in the academic year 1920, we switched the entire university system to an online system of teaching and examination. Not being the policy of any university or the policy of this ministry, but we believe that face-to-face teaching is still the most effective way of teaching, even if this has to be combined with any method that communication technologies of digital base allow us to do. But so my point is that it was essential that the universities had this system in which combining all kinds of requests, demands, and issues that have to be solved could transform in a few weeks the entire university system, which in Spain is a large university. There are 87 universities, 1.5 million students. So this has been an example of the importance of the decisiveness of the system of governance. At the same time, it was essential also to consult with everybody, to have students and everybody else to participate in the decisions that were taken, because that's what we are. We have to give example of democracy if we live in a world in which democratic values are always under threat and have to be always defended and supported by the university community. Important as it is to have fun, it is even more important that we understand the connection between the values, interests, and problems of society at large, and not just the university community, society on the one hand, and the autonomy of the university on the other hand. So the autonomy of the university is a fundamental principle that in the Spanish Constitution is has become a fundamental statement. Universities are autonomous and cannot be other than autonomous. And any government legislation, any policy, anything has to be always respectful of the autonomy of the universities, of the self-government of universities. This is fundamental. At the same time, we cannot become prisoners of our own ivory tower and cut ourselves from the world of suffering and problems, from the economic issue, from the threat to democratic and social values, from the constant abuses and discrimination against women, against people of non-white races, against migrants. All this is part of what the university has to pay attention to. And also, we have to be in direct contact with a world that creates wealth, with business, with the companies that want to contribute to the university and at the same time benefit from the strategies of research and training that we are able to develop in the university. Both ways. We have to be autonomous, we have to defend autonomy to the end, and at the same time, we have to be open. We have to be open to the entire society, to all the values, to everybody. And it's only if we are open, only if we integrate all the demands of society toward us, that then we can claim with legitimacy our autonomy. To be autonomous, to be selfish, to live in our own world and ignore what's happening around us, to do that is not to be a university person nowadays. So autonomy and responsibility, social responsibility at the same time. So I think I leave you with some of these general ideas, but that because they are general, need to be translated into specific decisions, specific institutions, specific mechanisms, and specific political will and personal will to make our universities work. Thanks so much. Good luck in your work.
Before you leave, Manuel, I just want to say hello.
Hello.
I haven't seen you in a long time.
Now, can you identify yourself, sir?
Martin Carnoy.
Oh, you are there.
I am here. Yes, I'm here.
You are so handsome with your hat that I almost did not recognize you. Now I see this beautiful Panama hat that makes you look like an elegant Mexican bandit, which is what we have in California. Well, for you to know, I'm very grateful that Professor Martin Carnoy from Stanford is participating in this meeting. He is, for me, besides one of my oldest and closest friends, he is clearly is considered, widely considered, this is not just a personal biology, one of the leading theories and researchers in education in the world. In a comparative approach, understands many languages, understands many societies, and it's really an honor for the Spanish government that you participate in this meeting. Thank you, my friend.
You look great, by the way.
Not as great as you with your hat, but I try to do what I can.
Thank you so much.
Life is too brief.
Bye. So thanks a lot. We thank both for this warm welcome and also for the minister introduction also. And now I would like to address the amazing composition, as also the minister was saying, of this roundtable. From the Ministry of Universities, we are really honored by your presence, dear colleagues. So I will present every one of you which have presence today in our panel, and afterwards you can from the audience you can throw questions on the Zoom chat, and we will try to make a selection and answer as much as possible depending on the time we have. So we have here today Ms. Enora PRUVOT, Deputy Director, Governance, Funding and Public Policy Development at European University Association. This is a short title. She's responsible for implementing the European University Association policy and university funding and governance. She focused on financial sustainability, institutional autonomy, governance and leadership, as well as European Union funding programs. Welcome, Ms. PRUVOT.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much for coming. Also, with some difference on the hour, we want to welcome Mr. Martin Carnoy, who is a labor economist with a special interest in the political economy of the educational system. He specializes in comparative analysis. He's a professor of education and economics in the Stanford Graduate School of Education since 1977. Welcome, and shall we say good morning, Mr. Carnoy?
Thank you very much. It's really an honor to be with all of you.
Thank you so much also. We have also in our roundtable Susan Wright, which is a professor in educational anthropology at the Danish School of Education in Aarhus University since 2003. Her area of expertise is related to anthropology, higher education, governance, and culture, and she has collaborated with many associations such as Anthropology in Action, for example. Welcome, Susan Wright.
Thank you very much, and it's a great honor to be here. Thank you.
And finally, we are accompanied today by Vera Sacristan. She is a retired professor of applied mathematics at the Universitat Politécnica de Catalunya, where she led the research group in computational, combinatorial, and discrete geometry. She has been vice rector for personnel at the same university and a member of the working group on teaching and research staff of the Sectorial Academic Commission of Spanish Universities, a body of the Conference of Rectors of Spanish University, among many other things. She belongs to Universities Observatory in Catalonia. Thank you so much. Welcome, Vera.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So we are really pleased for coming, the four of you. Thank you so much. We are honored, as we were saying, to be able to count on you in this roundtable. First of all, I would like to ask you for a brief presentation of the topic, governance and universities, about 10 minutes, more or less, based on your personal experience, your research, your perspective. You are a diverse group of experience, therefore, feel free to approach the topic as you please to do it, because we trust your knowledge and your experience. We will go alphabetically for starters, even if afterwards we will have a more fluid debate. Sorry if I make some gentle interruptions, but we must meet the timetable as it is limited by the organization. I promise I will be polite. So we can start with Ms. Enora PRUVOT. Many thanks. You can go ahead.
All right, so we're doing alphabetical order of first names then, I guess. Otherwise,
that's it. Yes.
Wouldn't be in the first seat. But it makes a lot of sense, if you don't mind, actually, because I represent the European University Association, and of course, I can give overviews, but I don't have the personal experience and the deep research that the other speakers on this panel have. So I think it makes good sense for me to try and frame the issue a little bit. I just want to clarify what the European University Association is, just so that people understand what the background for our perspective is. So we are the umbrella organization for universities across Europe in a geographical sense of the term, meaning that we cover about 800 institutions over 46 countries. So all those countries that are signatories to the Bologna process. That obviously includes Spain, where we have about 60 members, both public and private universities, as well as the CRUE, the National Rectors Conference. And we work closely with both our individual members and our collective members in trying to advance the voice of universities at the European level towards the European institutions, but also help our members in their national dialogue with public authorities. So therefore, it's really a pleasure to join today in a complicated conversation about university governance reform. So we are a sector organization, but we also conduct a lot of research. And the work that we've done on university governance has been informed by this relationship we have with institutions and rectors' conferences over the last 15 years now. We have established at the beginning of the 2010s the so-called University Autonomy Scorecard, which was our first focus basically on governance, where we looked at the capacity of universities to do a series of things, such as decide on how their leader is selected, or looking at obviously the financial autonomy they have, and so on and so forth. So we looked at 4 dimensions, and one of them is organizational autonomy, which obviously has a huge component to connected to governance. So this is where we come from. We focused first on the relationship between the state and the institutions, and as we moved into our analysis, we more and more focused on the internal processes and how to basically look beyond structures and setups, but actually look at informal processes within the institution. I would share with you some of the trends and conclusions that we have reached over the years throughout our analysis, and focusing obviously on the governance aspect. What we have seen is that organizational autonomy, so the actual setup of the governance model, and who takes part in what, and how big the governance bodies should be, and whether you're allowed to decide on academic structures and so on, is actually a topic that's under constant discussion across Europe for the last 10 to 15 years. Again, we did a study in 2010, and we did another one in 2016-17, and that's the interest has just grown and grown over time. It's become an area that's, while it's a hot topic, there's an increased interest from the university sector and the policymakers in actually finding out what's being done elsewhere. So in the perspective of benchmarking, we have seen that interest grow and grow. And why? Well, I mean, there's various reasons, but obviously one is the evolving needs that universities have to meet nowadays. And there's an acute understanding that the organizational setups and the governance models may be limiting or inhibiting or actually enabling this capacity to react to those new needs. What we also see is that the leadership is a concept that's broader than just looking at who is in the governance body. And that's also a view that we've been trying to promote, is that the formal setup is one thing, but actually you need to look at how you connect to the informal processes, and to how do you embed into the communication ecosystem of the institution. So what kind of tensions are we looking at? And I think the minister made actually a very good summary. We have this sort of first level tension between, or so perceived tension between participation on the one hand and efficiency on the other, with the idea that perhaps involving too many people might be detrimental to efficiency. And that's a concept that we need to deconstruct and look at a little bit more closely, which we will do today. There's the idea of autonomy and accountability, which again, I would like to question whether there's a real, well, there's a tension for sure, but is there real opposition between the two? I personally don't think so. And of course, the idea of academic steering against perhaps a broader inclusion of society or external stakeholders, where again, Spain here is quite a special model when looking at most other European systems, with with the system of consejos sociales, which are quite unusual in the European university governance model. We also, and a final tension actually, which the minister also referred to, is the idea of how you select your leadership. So whether you go through election or through nomination routes, and both exist again in the European setup. Just perhaps 2-3 more remarks before I finish on my side. We're looking at the leadership, as I mentioned, and there the idea is also not only to look at the leadership is a very interesting point of focus, because you need to look at the accountability of the leadership towards two directions in a way: accountability towards the university community, and the accountability towards public authorities, and society at large. And there again, there are various ways of tackling this. But perhaps just a general point that needs to be made at this point, and the capacity of leaders to react, particularly in crises like COVID, shows that support to leadership is a crucial aspect and should be considered in the framework of reforms, governance reforms. So support to leadership to enable and equip the leaders to address crisis will be a necessary part of the discussion. I don't want to go into the different models that exist in Europe, but we have unitary and dual models. And one just final trend that is relevant and important, I think, is that there's an increased interest in experimenting. We have seen lots of countries in Europe that actually are including distinctions between institutions, so that you don't have all universities, or like all public universities, treated the same way in the same ecosystem, in the same regulatory framework. And that's extremely interesting and important to see what happens in those systems where certain universities have different statuses and different rights and prerogatives than others. And that's also a discussion that's going to come up very importantly at European level with European University Initiative and those new groups of universities that we see there. So there are a number of trends that are emerging. I think that should be it for now.
Thank you so much, Enora. So we can go now with the intervention of Martin Carnoy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. You know, I'm, first of all, I'm again so happy to be with you. I should point out that I am also a citizen of the EU since last November. So after many years, at an advanced age, I now have 2 passports. So I'm very tempted to do a big analysis of universities, public universities, private universities, but I was asked to do a personal thing about my university, and I will try to do that. I'm an elite private university like Stanford is a very special category, particularly if we're talking about Europe and public universities. But let me just quickly say this. In the US, we have a very different kind of system from Europe. First of all, we have it's a very big system, and we have 4-year universities and 2-year universities. This is, of course, in Europe. We also have very different kinds of institutions of different lengths. But in the United States, about 71% of all higher education students are in 4-year institutions, and 65% of those are in public institutions. Almost all the students in 2-year colleges are in public institutions, 95, 96%. And they, of course, depend on public funding. But the public funding for both 4-year and 2-year institutions come from largely from the states, not from the federal government. The federal government gives money for research and for scholarships for low-income students. Those are the 2 areas that the federal government is involved in. So, except for research, the public universities are accountable to the states, not to the nation, not to the country. So their sort of public is the state public. So, for example, the University of California is a large institution, has 225,000 students. It's an elite university, it's research universities. They're accountable, they're autonomous. They're accountable to the state of California, not to the nation as a whole. And the state university system, which is also a 4-year system, is in theory autonomous, but depends directly on the legislature. It's accountable to the legislature of the state very much like many European public universities. And they depend for their funding, such as it is, largely from the state. So the second thing is that there's been a large decline in public financing of higher education in the United States. First, private institutions now receive only 12% of their funding from public sources, which is largely in the form of scholarships. It's almost entirely in the form of scholarships and research money. And tuition is up across institutions everywhere. All universities, even community colleges charge tuition. But it's for state universities and for even for the University of California, tuition represents about 20% of the funding. For two-year colleges, it's a little bit less. Stanford is an elite private research university, and its governance is very different from the public universities. It's run largely by a hierarchical administration composed of academics turned administrators. It's controlled by a board of trustees, all of whom attended the university at some time and are usually large donors. Stanford only has 16,000 students, and 9,500 of those are graduate students. The university depends for funding its operations, aside from its large medical complex. The medical complex is 50%, 57% of the revenue of the university, or medical complex. So usually you put that aside because it has very little to do with instruction, except in the middle of the school. By the way, the University of California's medical centers account for 35% of their revenue. So the rest of the revenue at Stanford comes from three sources: student tuition, which is 15%, sponsored support, which is largely the overhead on federal research grants, is 41% of the revenue of the university that doesn't, when you exclude the medical center, and the investment income of the university accounts for the income taken from its private investments is 42%. So the university depends on this large amount of capital that it has, which is called the endowment. And it's $29 billion. I think it's the third or fourth largest in the United States after Princeton, Harvard. I don't remember, but Princeton and Harvard per student have much higher endowment than Stanford. But it has to be remembered that the financing of the university is both federal and private. It gets no money from the state. So you could call it a national university because it's a national research university. But the role of the administration is very interesting because the president of the university of a private university spends an enormous amount of time raising private money. And the strategic decisions at the university are made almost entirely by the president, the provost, and other high administration staff with input and approval from the board of trustees. The university is accountable to the public. First of all, because it is accountable to the federal government for the research funding, and it must follow the rules and regulations of the federal government. The larger rules and regulations. For example, it has to be very sensitive to diversity. For example, funding women's athletics under Title IX. Half of all the programs have to be for women. So it has to conform to all these kind of federal rules and regulations. It's also a major owner of land in the region. Stanford is a big landowner, and how it uses its land is subject to local regulations, which are negotiated with public officials. Anytime Stanford wants to build something, it has to negotiate this with local officials. The other thing is that unlike European university, athletics are a very important part of the relationship with the alumni. And it's a funding mechanism. Athletics are a funding mechanism. And a significant part of undergraduate admissions are student athletes. So these are quite, I mean, the relationship with the alumni and raising money is one of the most important accountability mechanisms of the university. Now, the university is very nimble as a result of all this. It's able to react to change very quickly. This is what Manuel talked about, being nimble. But it doesn't do so democratically. The faculty, I have to say, being a faculty member, has very little to say about the strategic direction of the university, except that the university moves strategically very much as a research university. So it's very responsive to the world outside. It's in Silicon Valley. It's a high-tech university. It's a leading science university. It's in the heart of the innovative, it's the innovative center of the world, this area, and in certain kind of innovation, of high-tech innovation. And so the university is part of that. The university helped create it. The university created Silicon Valley by actually leasing land to companies to come here and do their innovation around the university. And the university supplies an enormous amount of engineers and scientists to companies in Silicon Valley. So the faculty are a source of fundraising through research grants. And so the faculty has to be very responsive to what is being funded out there. And at the same time, the university is trying to, as I say, raise money. The result of all of this is that faculty have a say implicitly in the direction that the university is heading. And the students in some way do also, because the students are very sensitive politically. The university admits only 1 out of 50 applicants, 2% of undergraduates. The faculty have nothing to say about the undergraduate admissions and have everything to say about graduate admissions. The faculty completely control the 9,000 students who are admitted into graduate admissions. But I guess faculty has influence through its research, what it does in research, but not in the overall strategic decisions of the university. And I would say that the students have influence largely through their sensitivity to public issues. And the university is very sensitive to public issues in the sense that it has a brand. It has a brand. And as a university, the brand has to be maintained by how it is viewed in responding to the issues of the day. And most universities in the United States are quite liberal, quite liberal. There are very conservative universities, it's true, almost all private. But even the private universities are quite liberal. And for example, this latest Black Lives Matter movement and all this has affected the university a great deal. And the university has immediately responded by trying to organize all kinds of activities around greater diversity, about being sensitive to things, and trying to solve social problems with its research. So it does respond that way, and it's very nimble in responding that way. So I don't want to take too much time. Let me just finish with the strengths and weaknesses very quickly. So the advantage of the Stanford governance system is the enormous autonomy that it gives to faculty and students to be innovative, particularly if they can adapt to the long-run strategies promoted by the university and the trustees. The other thing is the university is very wealthy because it's a very good fundraiser, because it spends a lot of time raising money. That's what it does. And in the Stanford case, I would say that the university made a very important move 15 years ago. It decided to become very interdisciplinary, and it pushed us and it incentivized it. And I must say, as a faculty member, I have relationships across the university, and I can do research with other people at the university. And the students are fluid to move around between the departments and take courses everywhere. And the university implemented this in a very effective way. The disadvantage is that faculty and students have essentially no power except to lead, especially if the leadership of the university chooses not to favor their work. If backed by the Board of Trustees, high-level administrators have almost complete power over the direction of the university. They will claim that they don't, but it's absolutely not the case. Furthermore, the university is accountable to the public in one way, but it's not formally accountable to the public. It's a private university, and it's mostly accountable to some kind of idea that it's supposed to be at the top of the innovation system. It's accountable to that idea, to that concept, but the fact that it doesn't have to be accountable, for example, to the state of California or to the nation as a whole, gives it certainly flexibility, but it also, I would say, makes the university seems more like a corporation. What Manuel says, universities are not corporations. Well, Stanford is a corporation, but it's a sensitive corporation in the sense that it does respond to, in some sense, public view of its brand. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. We will like to hear right now to Susan Wright, if it's possible. Susan, welcome also.
Thank you. Can I share my screen? Because I have some slides that I would like to show.
Of course you can.
Host disabled participant screen sharing. Can you
okay.
enable me?
Enrique, can you enable Susan to share the screen? Please.
She's
I think you just have to make her a co-host or something.
I've done it. It's okay now.
Okay, perfect.
Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed again for inviting me. And I prepared a short talk, hopefully only 10 minutes, on governance and participation in Denmark. Now, my perspective will be the national policy and end up talking about my own university as asked. Can I get this to move? Yeah. Okay, and I think the approach that I take to governance fits quite well with what's been talked about so far. It's not just the relations between government and university leadership, which is what sometimes the literature focuses on, but decision-making within the institution and all the way down the institution. So that as an anthropologist, I'm interested in the framework within which academic students and support staff conduct their daily life. So that's one point, so it's governance all the way down. But the other one is not just to focus on legal and formal structures, but how it works in practice. And here, the Minister and also Mrs. Bernadotte also talked about the importance of practice. So how governance is enacted in everyday life, how it shapes participants and how participants are able to shape it. And why Denmark? Well, I think it's an interesting example because we had one big reform in 2003, which brought in a legal and formal structure. And over time, it has worked in two completely different ways in practice. So it's a good example for looking at how a formal structure actually turns out to work in very different ways, depending on the practices that are developed. I've got a slide with background for this work, but most importantly is we've been doing ethnographies of the Danish university reforms from 2003 right through to the current, and that's just come out in a book called Enacting the University. We also have a Centre for Higher Education Futures, which networks across the university, across the Danish universities and internationally, and is bringing together research on thinking about the shifting mandates for the global mandates for higher education, the changing internal life of universities, and how to organize universities for the future. So thinking about the Danish university reform in 2003, at that time, there were two different discourses about governance. In both of the discourses, the argument was that government was setting universities free to drive Denmark's success in the global knowledge economy. But one discourse was around the reform of universities being part of a wider public sector reform, which was bringing in stronger state steering of what were called service providers. And some public institutions might think of themselves as service providers, but universities aren't usually thought of as service providers. And the aims of that reform were to bring in greater steering of the university's use of state resources and to make universities more quickly responsive to changes in government policy. So that was one discourse. The other discourse was quite different. It was thinking of universities being a new power force in society. And the idea was to enable universities to expand their own ambition and capacity to compete globally, so that leaders and academics throughout the university could develop research strategies, education, and engagement with society that went beyond the government's imagination of the role of the universities. So there's a tension between these two different ideas of governing the university. One is to have stronger state control, which obviously would be a conservative thing because it would restrict the university to what the government can imagine for it. And the other was to exceed that imagination and be a power force shaping society. And it implies that the system of governance would work in two different ways. And so my question going into this research was, which way does it work? So first of all, looking at the formal structure, it was called an aim and frame steering structure. And I think it's worth just giving some detail on this because this is the apparatus that is articulated in different ways at different moments. So first of all, the university's status was changed and they became self-owning institutions. They were set free of government control and open to the demands from surrounding society, whether that be government, industry, or society. They had a legal status that enabled them to enter into contracts, and they were to use contracts to negotiate their relationships with those demands from government, industry, and society. And in doing that negotiation, the university was now responsible for protecting its own freedom and research ethics. It was also self-owning in the sense it had to protect itself and it had to stay solvent. It wasn't to go broke, but the state retained control of all the land and assets. So this is a strange idea of self-owning. The role of politicians in this governance system was to set the political aims for the sector and to develop a 4-yearly development contract with performance indicators to show that the university was meeting those aims. And the politicians would also establish the budget and the steering system to make sure that the sector fulfilled those political aims and responded quickly to any political changes. And to do that, they instituted or developed further a system of payment by results, which tightly control the university's equity and liquidity. So this became a key steering instrument for the government. They set up a new board with a majority of external stakeholders. There's only about 9 or 11 people on the board, and just 1 or 2 academics and 2 students and 1 administrator elected to the board, but outnumbered by the external stakeholders. And the board then appointed the rector, and the rector then appointed the deans of the schools, the faculties, and then the deans then appoints the departmental heads. And so we have a string of leaders who are upwardly accountable to the leader who appoints them, but have freedom to manage They can manage whichever way they think best, as long as they deliver on the performance targets. And they replaced an elected system where you had an elected rector, an elected dean, an elected department head, with an elected senate and an elected faculty board and an elected institute board. That was all abolished. The upshot of this was that the government relation with universities is that it could no longer tell the universities what to do. Either it had now to pass an act of parliament to get self-owning institutions to change what they were doing, or the government had to persuade universities to carry out the government's wishes voluntarily, but it also had these financial levers. And what we saw in the years following this was a continual negotiation between ministry and rectors. But often the reaction seemed to be as if the rectors still felt they were being steered. We didn't see this power force in society in those relationships. And we've also seen over the years a number of scandals as universities and academics' independence and research freedom has not been protected. Now, so what was the participation of academic staff and students in this? Well, in the law, the directions that went along, it's got the status of law, but their directions for interpreting the university law in 2003 stated that there should be a system for involving employees in decision-making at departmental level. In 2009, there was an international panel who reviewed progress in these reforms, and they showed that these systems were not in place. So in 2011, the government responded to the panel by revising the university law and making the statement stronger. The university's governing board ensures that the co-determination and involvement of staff and students in material decisions. And then in 2014, the government, the ministry employed a survey company to see if that was happening. And the result was overall employees have experienced a decline in leaders' responsiveness and in opportunities to have influence. So really the point that the minister made about the need for strategic decision-making plus participation, that balance has never been achieved within the Danish university reforms. But let me just give an example of the way that this system has been articulated in two different ways. First, early on after the reforms, and now more recently. Let me use the example of the internationalization strategy to illustrate what's been happening. So I'm calling this governance in practice. One of the aims was of these reforms for Denmark to be much more competitive in the global knowledge economy. So internationalization became a very strong policy area. And in 2007, the ministry set up a national strategy to attract the best international talent to Denmark, both students and staff, and also companies that would collaborate with Danish universities. And between the Foreign Office and the Ministry of Education and Science, they set up Danish innovation centers in Silicon Valley, of course, Munich, New Delhi, Seoul, Shanghai, and Tel Aviv. And the aims were to link Danish researchers and companies to innovation environments, to foster education cooperation and student mobility, and to attract investment to Denmark. That was one thing they did. And the other thing they did was they entered into a number of intergovernmental agreements around the world. And I've got a picture of the Chinese one with some green quotes, which just show how it was trying to be two-sided. The collaboration with China can contribute towards positioning Denmark in the global knowledge economy, and Denmark can offer pedagogical advantages to China. And also the 8 Danish universities collaborated in setting up a Sino-Danish center in Beijing that was negotiated by the Foreign Office. So there was a very strong link between the Foreign Office, the Ministry of Education, and the rectors in setting up a framework for internationalization. They also made some changes to the national policies that gave incentives for universities to internationalize. The master's programs could be offered in English. The Research Council could open its funding for PhDs and research to international researchers, which is quite unusual. And there was a big move to internationalize academic staff. So this is an example of the government providing a framework. And within that framework, the expectation was that university leaders, academics and students would fill out that framework using their own visions for the future of, say, what the leaders thought their vision for the future of their university would be, academics, what the future of their discipline could look like, developing new education programs internationally, developing international collaboration and new research areas. And this was a very successful strategy which showed an enormous growth in international networking, publications and English medium education programs. So this is what I would call framework policy or strategic making. The relationship between the government and the leaders, and between the leaders and the academics and the students, is one of providing opportunities which you then expect other people to use their own initiatives to fill out. That changed. In autumn 2018, the government suddenly announced that universities had to cut 1,200 places in English medium education for the next intake. So this is after we'd already started advertising for the next intake. And each university was told how many cuts they had to make, although they were free to choose how to make those cuts within their university. And then just in November, the government has announced a further round of cuts, and the Rectors Association expects that the government will require them to cut 20 to 25%. That's a quarter of all our English medium courses. So why did this happen? Well, in 2013, the EU court made a decision that if EU students are working in Denmark for 12 hours a week, they counted as mobile workers and were eligible for the very generous student grant that Danish students get. All the political parties were upset about that, to put it mildly, and they responded by making an agreement to set a ceiling for the spending of the student grant on EU students. At that time, the ceiling looked a long way away, but our internationalization strategy has been so successful that that ceiling was breached in 2018. And even though we made the cuts to 1,200 places of against all international students, not just EU students, the number of EU students getting grants has increased, and we've breached the ceiling again. So there's another round of cuts due now. Underlying this is the thing which dare not speak its name in Denmark, which is this ethno-nationalism. And I have a quote from the Dansk Folkeparti, the Danish Folk Party. The problem is that we offer an education service here that they don't have in Romania. So clearly they look to take a degree up here, but we need to ensure first and foremost that our tax funds go to educating Danish young people. And education must be conducted in Danish, because if we offer English language education, we're open to these migrant workers. So this was obviously a highly contentious stance to take, and the universities were informed that they had to make these cuts. So the question was how. Well, the question I can't answer at the moment is the legal basis on which the ministry asked the universities to make those cuts. I cannot understand why the universities agreed. One university refused. But now turning to what happened in my university, the pro-dean responsible for education told us that decisions were now made by what he called commando-vi. And by that he meant a fixed procedure that one must follow in a hierarchical system. The minister tells the rector tells the dean tells the institute leader tells us what's happening. These decisions are he explained these decisions are top down based on numbers. What my university decided to do was cut out the international students from a number of international courses. Other universities did it differently. So we've ended up with an international course with only Danish students on it. There was no representation allowed from academics or students or discussion. This is what the ministry in 2003 called freedom from fuss. Other people call it democracy. There was no explanation for this way of dealing with the problem. Other universities were doing it differently. Why was our university doing it this way? There was no academic discussion of different ways of doing internationalization, because English medium education doesn't necessarily mean international education. And there were no answers to our practical questions. What are we allowed to do? What can we advertise? What restrictions are there on intake? What can we do? What can we can't do? And this is just as the process we're dealing with the admissions for the next year. So in conclusion, I've given you an example of the same legal and formal governance system that can be used in practice in two quite contrary ways. In the first instance of internationalization, the government provides a framework, and the leaders, academics and students use their own knowledge or visions or to fill it out with and take their own initiatives to do so. And in this way, the university is acting as a power force in society. But the other way is that the government changes its political priorities and immediately instructs universities to implement changes. The university then mobilizes its hierarchy of upwardly accountable leaders, and there is no co-determination or involvement of academics or students in a major decision. And what happened in 2018, 2019 was the first time since 2003 that the hierarchical steering structure all the way down from the ministry through to the institute were completely articulated in that way. And in this way, the university becomes a tightly governed and government-steered service provider. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you so much for this radiography. So we would like to listen right now to Vera Sacristan.
So give me a second that I try to share my screen.
Okay.
Let's see if I can do this properly. Okay, so how can I now see you? Oof. Give me a second, I'm doing something wrong.
Do not worry, Vera, you have the button of sharing a screen on the right.
I know, that's
okay.
not a problem.
Okay.
The problem is that I cannot then see this. Okay, now let me see if I find the bottom, as you said. Okay, I'm trying, but that's not what I wanted to do. So I have a problem in trying to sharing the screen that really has the full screen thing. I managed to do it before, but I don't.
Yes, you were doing it before we started.
Yeah, I know, but now I can't. So that's okay. So what are you guys seeing? Are you seeing the full screen or the?
We are seeing the first slide of your presentation.
Just that, nothing else.
And also the rest of your slides on the left side of the screen.
That's the thing. I don't understand why, but you're seeing more than I would like you to see, but never mind.
It's okay. We will keep the secret until you say to us.
No, okay. But anyway, do you really see the screen big or what? Wait a minute.
Yes, we can read.
No. I can make it. I can
bigger.
Make it
okay.
Bigger, but that's not the screen that I want to show. Let me see. Oh, here. Now you're seeing the big one?
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Only the big one.
Only the big one. Good.
Thank you, Vera.
You're welcome. It's not easy. Okay, so let me see if I can pass this thing. Okay. Okay, so thank you for your patience. Thank you for your patience. So let me start my presentation by a very short discussion on the context in Spain about this today's topic. And as has been said before, also in Spain, there has been a completely endemic debate about reforming universities. As soon as a new law or a new decree is passed, and we had plenty of them, we start hearing again that our universities need to be reformed, and that those reforms need to radically change the way our public universities are governed. And sadly, most of these proposals are not based on a serious analysis of the real problems that our university system has. And actually, they don't even refer to the entire university system as a whole, but only to the internal government of public universities. So what I believe is that before discussing governance, one needs to first analyze the strengths and weaknesses of our university system, and then one needs to understand which of these issues are attributable to its governance and which are completely independent from it, okay? But before I start trying to say a few things about this analysis, let me make a statement that I think that the ideal governance system does not exist. Why? Because it completely relies on our notion of what a university is or should be, and it's conditioned by our context, economic, social, even the story of our universities, which in Spain is an important one. So in that context, to be very, very brief, I want to mention that the Spanish higher education system, and in particular universities, is mainly public. It has a good average quality, and it has very low dispersion. From that viewpoint, it's completely different from the US very varied, unbalanced system, okay? Our institutions are very similar. And about my viewpoint, my conception of university is that universities should be quality public institutions at the service of citizens. And this said, I can start my analysis, okay? Now, there exists about governance, there exists a quite spread cliche in Spain that claims that university excellence or even quality depends upon governance, and that the world's best universities are governed hierarchically from a board mainly composed of external members. And this is just not true. And it has been acknowledged that the most important universities across European countries have very different governance systems by many authors, some of which we very well known here. But if you want a local sort of witness, if you wish, just think of private universities in Spain. They are governed in this way, and they cannot be compared in terms of quality with public universities. So I leave you here this long citation. I will not go through it. It's a citation from Ortega Gasset in Misión de la Universidad. I think it's very appropriate, and you can read it later if you wish. It's about how much one can do benchmarking or not. And let me go to the second cliche that I want to mention today. The second cliche claims, it's very popular in Spain, that current governance system is assembly-like and therefore inefficient and ineffective. Now, clearly, whoever makes these claims has never been in an assembly, or they don't know how exactly our boards work, because our bodies government bodies in our universities have a small number of members. They are chosen and run following rules that are established by law. And the fact is that Spanish public universities were able to undergo an incredible modernization and change in 20 years from the end of the dictatorship, essentially. And they moved from having 364,000 students to more than 1.5 million. And research evolved from almost non-existent during dictatorship to international standards. And all this happened under the currently supposedly inefficient, ineffective, slow, assembly-like government. So what's wrong here? So what really happens, I think, is that collegial decision-making is uncomfortable for officers. And believe me, I've been vice president of my university. I know it is. But and also happens that academic units like schools, departments, and the like have a level of autonomy that sometimes makes your life complicated when you want to give the university an overall coherence, okay? But from my viewpoint, these issues are the price to pay for a balanced contrast of interests. And in any case, these drawbacks do not prove that externally controlled, internally hierarchical governance would work better. As an old friend of mine used to say, in autumn, fallen leaves clog drains, and in spring, pollen causes allergies, but that's not a reason to cut trees down. Consequences would be much worse. So what are, from my viewpoint, the main university governance drawbacks nowadays in Spain? I think I can highlight three. One is a clear difficulty in developing long-term or even mid-term strategies and planning. Secondly, too frequently universities manage their personnel and their economic resources in an inefficient way. And finally, corporatism. Corporatism appears too often in decisions and design of curricula, in faculty selection, in labor relations, things like that. And whose fault is that? So from my viewpoint, for the lack of strategic planning, governments are accountable, both federal and regional. For the inefficient resource management, social councils, that's our boards of trustees, okay? Social councils are. And for corporatism, of course, faculty are to blame. So if this is the diagnosis so far, the question is, what should we and what can we do? So if from the previous analysis, it becomes clear that we need to distinguish stakeholders and tasks to assign to the different stakeholders the different decisions to be made, I think we also need to increase transparency and democratic control over their actions. Because the answer to our problems cannot be more concentration of power, but more counterweight of power. Okay, so let me be a bit more precise and try to say a little bit how to distinguish stakeholders and tasks, which I think is the most difficult part of the task. So I would say that within the Spanish framework, public administration should be responsible for funding, for the general long-term planning, for guaranteeing equal opportunities in access to education, for guaranteeing equality, for guaranteeing freedom of teaching and research, and the collective interest of the entire academic activity, and for at least a framework of rights of the employees. Decisions that should correspond to the university community would be those of academic nature, basically related to teaching and research, and the decisions that would correspond to the social councils should be university specific, but not of academic nature. So I'm thinking of budget control and labor relations mainly. So I leave you here. Also, I will skip this. More specific details about who should decide about what in the different aspects, teaching, research, personnel, funding, and the like. And let me stop here, which I think contains something important. All what I said so far, I think needs to go hand in hand with a change of the composition of the social councils. That should be smaller, more professionalized, or at least more dedicated, and be participated by citizen organizations much more than they are today. And secondly, but even more important, managing directors, what we call gerentes, should not be appointed by rectors and councils. If we want them to be independent, and if we want them to professionally perform their duties, they need to be specialized civil servants. They cannot depend anymore upon political mandates or terms, or we will still see again economic problems as we have seen. I mean, Spanish public universities have been rescued more than once in regions like Madrid and Andalusia, and this should not happen anymore. And to end, let me insist on the importance of keeping academic decisions collegial. Why? Because the minister was talking about democracy. I am talking about something slightly different. Universities are professional organizations, so their success is based on conviction, on co-responsibility. Otherwise, I would never be able to explain how Spanish universities made such a progress despite their absolutely scarce resources. So the idea is that if you want faculty to permanently renew their activity, they need to participate in all the decisions that affect that activity. And if you want university to be managed by highly qualified staff, you need that staff to intervene in the technical decisions that affect what they are doing. And finally, students cannot be put at the center of their learning process and then excluded from the decisions related to that learning process. So what I'm saying at the end of the story is that collegial decision-making responds actually to a professional competence when we talk about faculty and staff, and to a good training for students. And finally, to conclude, rectors tend to persistently claim for further autonomy. I've tried to explain that they should specify for what. Why? Because we have experienced it in Spanish universities, the bad results of giving autonomy on the wrong topic. So just two examples. When public universities some decades ago could autonomously hire faculty, nepotism was a complete disaster. And actually now we have an external accreditation system that works much, much better. Or nowadays, the catalog of the titles has disappeared. Now universities can propose degrees freely, and this has completely diminished prospective students' rights because it has created a big confusion, problems. Students and families don't understand anymore the course offering, and the quality has clearly decreased. Now, together with this autonomy, same voices claim to eliminate ex-ante requirements and replace them by ex-post evaluation. Same thing here. This cannot be, from my viewpoint, a generic claim. One should say exactly for which topics, for which decisions we want that. So imagine that an ex-post evaluation on a degree, for example, leads to closing that degree. That has terrible consequences for students, for graduates, for taxpayers. So we need to clarify which topics can be evaluated ex post and which need to have some ex ante requirements. So altogether, I think what I'm trying to say is that this reform that the ministry wants to do should help universities to collaborate and not to compete, because market forces will not make university better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vera. We don't have that much time left, so I'm going to go directly to the questions that you put on the Zoom chat. First of all, we have a question from Steen Nepper Larsen. And the question is, how can the university ever become autonomous under the governance of the Bologna process of homogenization? So I think it's a confrontation between the Bologna process and the aim of autonomous of the university, autonomy.
Do you really think that there is an homogenization? I mean, I don't think this really happened. I think, at least from the viewpoint of Spain, Spain has organized our degrees and such in a completely different way from other European countries. I think the Bologna process wanted to make things comparable, but not homogeneous, which is very different. Now, maybe we could discuss whether our quality agencies want homogeneity. That's another story.
I think the reality is that all university systems in every country have various tiers of quality, whether just historically. So I think that it's been a fascinating presentation to me. Ultimately, universities produce students, produce graduates. Ultimately, they do research for innovation, that's true. But most universities don't do very much research, or they do research just to do it. It isn't cutting edge. It's, there's a whole industry that's grown up among publishers to produce this research. It's a several billion-dollar industry. But getting back to the students, so the real objective, one of the real objectives of universities, to produce high-quality students. But in fact, most universities don't produce high-quality students. Most universities are graduates. They produce graduates that are not that high quality. So in every country, there are the high-tier universities and there are the lower-tier universities. I have to say this, that one of the great successes of the US system has been the success of the second-tier state universities. Second-tier state universities. Most engineers in Silicon Valley, working in Silicon Valley, do not come from Stanford or Berkeley. They come from the state university system, and they're pretty good. Okay, these are low cost, not autonomous, because they're very much like European universities. It's hard to imagine a university being autonomous when it depends completely on the funding from the state. I can't understand that. If the government changes and it doesn't like universities, the universities are screwed. There is no autonomy of financial autonomy. They can claim to be autonomous. They can fool around and arrange their courses and stuff, but they have no money. And I think Vera's point that somehow they succeeded without money, it depends what you call success. They made it. They made it through, but I wouldn't call that success. I mean, the fact is that good universities are expensive, and to produce good students is expensive. If you want to have counterweight to faculty controlling their little kingdoms with their courses and their stuff, you hire new faculty. The university decides, we're going to start a new department. We're going to change this department. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. So I think we should confront reality about autonomy. The fact is that state universities depend on the state, and the state can tell the universities what to do by basically controlling the funding, controlling the rules. Okay. Within that framework,
let me just say that I've considered that to be a success because I remember how it was.
Yeah.
I agree.
Spanish universities during dictatorship, they were not universities, full stop.
Right. But that, I think there are a lot of universities in Spain that are pretty low quality.
Sure.
Yeah, so, and there's some great universities and there's some not good universities. That's true in every country. It's true in the United States, most higher education system is not high quality. But the point is that if you can focus on, if you can make the second tier better quality in terms of the kind of graduate produces, that's success, because that's where most of the university graduates come from. This is where most teachers come from. This is where most nurses come from. This is where most engineers come from. And if you can produce a good quality of that kind of graduate with good values and being able to solve problems, the country's better off, much better.
Can I jump in here? Because I think the sensitivity in Europe is a little bit different to the whole tier discussion. But in a way, I mean, this what we're talking now is more about optimization of the governance of the system. But I also understand that this workshop is interested in the internal processes, and I share a lot of the conclusions, well, or the observations, and some of the conclusions of Vera, who made a very clear case. But I think one thing that we should not forget is that it's not all black and white. So one thing we can also consider is a matrix type of approach as to the participation and the inclusion of the various communities and groups that are considered in this discussion. I mean, we're talking academic staff, non-academic staff, students, external stakeholders, who are various people in there. You have the public authorities, you have alumni, you have others. And I think the idea is that you don't need to consult the same people when you actually establish your 10-year strategic plan for your institution than you actually need for perhaps daily decision-making processes. So another way of looking at this lens, I mean, Vera's model very much reminded me of a dual traditional model where you have a clear separation of tasks according to the stakeholders, so academic affairs to a Senate type of body, budgetary, real estate discussions more into board types of bodies. But you can also consider indeed just the types of decisions that need to be made and the type of influence and impact they will have on the strategic direction of your university, and then see, well, do I need to consult every student on question A, or is it okay to leave it in the hands of administrators? While question B might actually call for a complete different configuration. So what you need is actually a framework that enables the university to establish that grid of discussion, that sort of reading grid, and you can, of course, sort of constrain or check how this is done. But then within that framework, universities are able to push an agenda in a more efficient way. So we would call for a more sort of nuanced version of the discussion between democracy / inclusion and efficiency in the process.
Okay, I would like to address another question, which is related also to the educational projects and the innovations. Do you think that the governance system of a university is related to, or it can be related to the educational project? Meaning related also to other question that we could read on the chat, that if the governance can also talk about the things that happens within the classrooms, the relationship between the alumni and the professors and so on. Do you think a general law tend to regulate the governance at this very little level, or each university has to to develop this governance system on their own.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Has anyone on this panel ever been taught how to teach? Has anybody gone to a teaching course? I never have, but I just wonder if anybody else has, for teachers in the university.
Yeah, a guy presenting things in a very classical way, unidirectional with slides, telling us not to do that.
Right, but not how to do it. Right, okay. So I think the main complaint of students is that they face very bad teachers. And I mean, to me, the answer to your question, Hannah, is that you should require every professor to take at least a 3-month course in how to teach. Because I've sat in classrooms with university professors, which are great. And I've sat in a lot of classrooms with university professors, which are very boring. And I think that students don't complain about this very much because they don't know the difference. But the fact is that it's very, to me, the democracy in the classroom is the right of students to demand good teachers. And it's as simple as that.
Can I contribute here?
Of course, Susan.
Thanks. I've not ever had the privilege of being taught how to teach, but I have run a National Centre for Teaching and Learning. And I purposefully did not run courses on how to teach. But I did invite academics and students to think about why they are there, what they're trying to achieve as teachers or students, and how they could achieve that better, and what the constraints were and what the opportunities were, and then to develop research-based development projects around their own teaching and learning development, and then to disseminate that laterally across the whole sector. And that was a way of working to improve educational quality whilst respecting the professionalism of both the students and the teachers, which I think is, why would you want to intervene in any kind of way when you're trying to develop a system that depends on the professional motivations of the people concerned? So I based a whole program around building on the professional strengths and the professional pride and ambition of people, and developing improvements in teaching and learning that way. Thank you. And I might add that you can generate a terrific amount of educational improvement for very little money in that way.
Well, we have evaluations at the end of every course, and they're taken quite seriously by the administration. If you have consistently bad evaluations, and promotion depends, at least in part, on the quality of your teacher. I mean, I would say that most professors are not that interested in teaching. They're interested in doing research, at least at my university. But the fact is that there is some accountability to the students. But I really believe that when we talk about what we owe students and what responding to the voice of students, they came to the university, I think, with some ideals about what they wanted to learn, et cetera. And I think in a democratic process, in the classroom, which was your question, it's the pedagogical processes that are really important. Susan's point about running courses for university professors is a great idea. I wish they would do it more, but I think it should be required. It's required of a classroom teacher. Why wouldn't it be required of a university professor to have gone through some kind of a serious, high-quality pedagogical course? Because standing in front of a classroom and lecturing, which is a traditional thing, is not very good teaching.
So as we are almost running out of time, or already, Vera, do you want to add something?
To your question.
Okay.
Do we need a law? Do we need to have plenty of details in a law? We don't need to have plenty of details in a law. The law should warranty things. Should try to warranty rights, basically. That would be my answer. I know it's very ambiguous, but that would be my answer.
No, it's not. It's quite direct. So as I was saying, we are running almost out of time. So I wanted to address a final question. Some of you already told something about it, especially Vera in the final part of her presentation. But I would like to ask you, the four of you, how do you see the university of the future ruled? I know it's a very vast question, but I wanted to ask you directly if you have any concrete ideas of some successful governance system or device within your university that you find that it should be included in the university of the future. I know that it's a wide question, but and we live in a global world, so not all the countries should be the same answer. But I'm interested in the four of you to answer this question, if possible.
Shall I start, Hannah?
Let's go, Enora.
First thing EUA would say is that don't go cherry picking in other systems. You really need to have a holistic view. Yeah. So whatever works in Denmark or in Ireland might work because for completely different reasons that are not met in Spain or in France. Yeah. So that would be the first thing. And in addition, when looking at things like governance and autonomy, it's unfortunately what we've seen is a lot of times reforms that address part of the issue. So they will look at, I don't know, let's say tuition fees, but not look at internal financial management, or look at fees, but not look at staff or things like this. So the holistic view is quite important. That being said, the finding out what's happening out there and exchanging with peers is crucial just to understand the rationale for a reform process. That would be important. How it should be ruled, I think it was said, there's no ideal one solution. And there's also no, obvious path towards autonomy. We've seen setbacks in Europe. That's very important to remember. We have countries right now where the situation is worse than it was 10 years ago, funding-wise, but also right in terms of regulation. What we find is important is that in the end, the system allows universities to build a strategic profile. So it's not all about uniformity and everybody has to behave the same way. They have to be able to develop their academic offer. And they have to be supported by proper financial management capacity. That means they're able to have their own HR strategies and then need to be able to have a reflection on the governance model. I know I'm not offering any obvious concrete answers, but keep it holistic is definitely our advice.
Can I go next? As I'm sorry, I have to leave to go and get my vaccination, so I'm sorry about this. Just to say that I had the very good experience of working at Sussex University in the 90s when it was organized as a matrix organization, which meant that every department, had departments and it had schools, and the schools were interdisciplinary and the departments were disciplinary. And everyone in a department, they belonged to for different schools, and the schools are obviously made up with people from all the different departments. And every academic and every student spent half their time working in a department and half the time working in the schools. So I worked in anthropology in the School of Cultural and Community Studies. And that was a wonderful way of combining both a need to develop your own discipline and also the ability to work with colleagues flexibly in teams and across different spaces, and involve stakeholders from outside in discussions, a very flexible way of responding to the changing needs in society. So one of the problems with an interdisciplinary framework is that you lose the disciplinarity that often fires the interdisciplinarity. And the other problem with a disciplinary focus is it's siloed. And I just have this very, very positive experience of working in a matrix organization, which gave you stability and flexibility. And I think the future university needs to have that combination of stability and flexibility. And with that, I'm very sorry, I have to leave before the end, but I do have to go and get my vaccination. So thank you very much for inviting me and for a very fine meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming, Susan. Bye.
Hannah, I think it's really important in designing the governance system to keep in mind what it is that the university should be in the future. We have an enormous set of really big problems in the world, nationally, locally, very big problems facing us in the next 50 years. The universities have a double task. They have to help solve these problems with innovative thinking. We have a university supposed to be a place where people think innovatively, and part of their innovative thinking is to help to solve these problems. The second thing is we have to produce the next generation of thinkers and leaders and competent people to make the world a better place. And these are the students. So when we govern the system and we look at these two objectives, of course, to produce good students means that you have to have an environment in the university where people want to learn and people do learn. And that's terribly important. But the governance system has to also avoid the problem of, after all, universities are organizations. And what Vera mentioned, the corporatism, where people sort of fall in among themselves and say, oh, this is the place I work. I want to make it the best place possible for me to work. Well, there's a problem with that. The Italian universities are run by faculty to a large extent. It's a terrible problem because the faculty just make things nice for the faculty. They don't meet with students. I found in European universities that students don't get much attention from the faculty. In the American university, if you don't pay attention, they're paying tuition at an American university. At my university, you don't pay attention to the students, you're in trouble because they demand that you pay attention to them because they're paying you to pay attention to them. Now, that's a commodification of the university, maybe. But on the other hand, we should say, how do we do that in a public university? How do we do that in a system where we can't allow the university to sort of fall in on itself through the governance system? You have to keep our objectives external. And how do you make that work through the governance system? That's, to me, how do you make those two main objectives work? Thinking about the future, innovating, and producing the next generation of competent, innovative, thinking human beings that will make the world a better place.
I just subscribe everything that was said. So I said enough in my presentation. So everything that you said now, I really subscribe.
Okay, so thank you so much for coming. And thank you, EDUMEET, for hosting this roundtable also, especially Enrique, that we work together for several weeks. And see you maybe in the next roundtable where we can evaluate in 10 years if all the ideas here were really useful. I think they were. So in behalf of the Ministry of Universities, thank you so much again for coming.